Hey guys, Mike here. So, guess what? It's that time of year again. It's time to talk about the top 10 worst movies of the year. And to be honest, I didn't think that I would actually be able to make this list this year, mainly because I didn't really see that many movies this year that I normally do in previous years, mostly because of the cinemas being closed. But you know what? Even still, with the limited amount of movies that I've actually seen this year, I've still managed to make a top 10 worst movies list. Now, before I get started, let me go over a couple of things. I do go by UK release dates, so there may be some movies on here which came out last year, but they did come out in the UK this year, so that's why they're eligible for this list. Also, do keep this in mind. This is my opinion. Do not take it as gospel. If you like these movies, then great, more power to you. And as well, some of these movies aren't necessarily completely terrible. It's just that when I watched them, I just found little to no enjoyment from them. So, with that all out of the way, let's get started with my top 10 worst movies of 2020. Number 10. So, kicking off my list, we have the remake of Mulan. Now, to be honest, I didn't hate this movie as much as most other people did, though I can fully understand their disdain for this movie. Because to be honest, I do think there were some things that this movie did do well. The cinematography, the effects, things like that. This was a good looking movie. It's just everything else comes completely short. When I went to watch this movie, I almost didn't watch the original Mulan because I wanted to judge this one solely on its own merits. But in the end, I decided to watch the original Mulan because I hadn't actually seen it before, and I really wanted to see it, and I thought in the end it was probably the best way to compare the two. And after watching the original Mulan and then this new one, it's very easy to see why so many people don't like this movie. And as time's gone on, I've started to notice a lot more of the reasons why people don't like this movie. The fact that she's ridiculously overpowered, there's pretty much no consequence to anything she does. The relationships she has with all the other characters are just nonsensical and just don't really go anywhere. This film's devoid of life, fun, energy. And they got rid of all the songs. I mean, most of the songs weren't really all that great, but the ones that were great definitely did stand out. So basically, in a nutshell, the new Mulan movie does not improve upon anything that the original one did. So basically, you're better off just watch the original Mulan. Number 9. Now, when I go to watch a movie, I don't normally go for indie movies. Not that I think they're particularly bad, but it's just not really my kind of cup of tea. But I did decide to watch one and just kind of see what it was about. Plus, I was kind of bored and I just wanted to watch a new movie. So the next movie on my list is Baby Teeth. I didn't really know what this movie was about going into it, so I had no real expectations for it, but really I just took a look at the cover and thought, alright, this is going to be a kind of a teen bromance indie movie. And I was mostly right. I was initially intrigued to see where this film was going, the relationships that each of the characters had, but eventually it just got really draining just watching these characters interact because most of the time they're just at each other's throat for no reason, and for the most part as well, they're just too indie quirky. They rarely seem to act like, real people. And for the most part, it just seemed like they were being quirky for the sake of being quirky. And eventually, I just found no enjoyment with this movie, and I was really just struggling to get to the end. And once I did get to the end, I was just like, okay, I guess that was a movie. But in the end, I would say it just comes down to the fact that these movies aren't really for me. If you like these kind of movies, then you know what, that's great. But for me, I just don't really get much enjoyment out of them, so that's why this movie is on this list. Number 8. You know what? I love a good sci-fi movie. A team of astronauts, a race against time, ever-increasing stakes. What could go wrong? Oh yeah, The Midnight Sky. Honestly, this movie had all the ingredients needed to make a good sci-fi movie. But somehow, even with a great cast, a somewhat interesting premise, this movie just completely falls apart and is just very uninteresting to watch. It tries its best to be tense and impactful. It doesn't do that. It tries to be lighthearted and funny at times. It doesn't do that. And then it tries to make a big twist ending, and it doesn't even do that. Again, I would say that another minor factor as to why this movie is on this list is because me and my family just come off watching Soul, which was fantastic, and then we just came to watch this mediocre mess. But again, I wouldn't say that was the main reason, it was just one of the reasons. I still think even without having watched Soul beforehand, I still wouldn't have enjoyed this movie. Number 7. Robert Downey Jr.'s story is definitely an interesting one. He was a rising star, he had every opportunity in front of him, and then he just kind of let it all slip away, and then he had to work his way back up to the top to become one of Hollywood's top paid actors. And most of that was due to the fact that he played Iron Man. Robert Downey Jr. was on top for 11 years because of this character, and also roles that he had during Iron Man as well. This guy seemed unstoppable, but eventually he couldn't play Iron Man forever, so he decided to get out while he was still on top. So, what's the first thing the guy does after playing Iron Man for 11 years? Yeah, he goes and does Dolittle, a movie which no one asked for, and everyone was just completely baffled as to why he did it. Honestly, when I saw this trailer, I thought it was a joke. I was thinking, oh yeah, do another Dolittle remake, everyone's really clamoring for another Dolittle movie. But you know what, I wanted to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. I went to go see the movie in all good faith, thinking that this might be salvageable. And it just really wasn't. Honestly, this movie was just like a burning building. You want to look away, but you just can't pull yourself away from looking at it because you just kind of want to see what happens next. Honestly, this film was just so bizarre, so unfunny, and just so unoriginal. Nothing about it was interesting or compelling. And at the end of the day as well, I just was hoping this movie would end soon. And obviously this movie was received about as well as you would expect it would be. Ultimately, it was just a very bizarre choice for a first movie once you've come off playing one of the most popular characters in cinema. But I guess I'm not Robert Downey Jr. Number 6. A group of mercenaries going into Africa to rescue a young girl. What could go wrong? That sounds somewhat interesting. I know how. Lions and Megan Fox. I mean, honestly, I didn't expect this movie to be good. I just kind of put it on just to watch a movie. To be honest, I didn't even actually recognize it was Megan Fox at first. I just saw the poster and thought, this might be alright. Then when the movie started, I was like, oh god, it's Megan Fox, she's still acting. Okay. But then literally, from the very first CGI shot of the lion, I just knew this movie was not gonna be good. I know it's probably not necessarily the fairest thing to do, to judge a movie's quality solely on the first CGI shot, but to be honest, the rest of the movie didn't really prove me wrong. The characters were incompetent, the story was uninteresting. Though they did have somewhat interesting chemistry, it didn't really carry over for the rest of the movie. The action was unentertaining, uninspired, and ultimately this movie was just very much A to B and nothing else. No kind of real substance to it. But to be honest, I wasn't really expecting much else, but I thought maybe this movie might surprise me, but at the end of the day, it was just like, it was a Megan Fox action movie, what could I expect? Number 5. I do like Seth Rogen. I feel that for every 5 movies he does, he has one which stands out. But American Pickle is definitely not one of them. Again, this was another one which I had no real idea what it was about going into it. But then as soon as it really gets started, it starts to become a bit more wacky and silly, and I thought, alright, if you can kind of keep this wacky, silly theme going, this might be quite interesting to watch. But unfortunately, I feel like the film found a blend of being too silly and at the same time being too serious as well. I don't even know how you did that. I think it was mainly because they just tried to inject too much politics into this one. Now, I'm not saying that politics is inherently unfunny, but when it's basically just poking fun at real life and it's trying to say something about our real world and, our modern day and everything like that, it starts to really bog the movie down. It's very obvious what the filmmakers are trying to say about this one, and you feel that this message really overtakes the actual comedy itself. Speaking of comedy, there wasn't really that much to salvage anyway. Most of it's just predictable slapstick, silly one-liners which may sometimes get a chuckle out of you, but I gotta be honest, I did not laugh once at this movie. And if I'm watching a comedy and I don't laugh at all, that for me spells a horrible comedy, which is definitely the case for An American Pickle. Number 4. When horror is done correctly, it can be some of the best things that cinema can produce. Whether it be a murderer stalking their prey, or an alien set to consume all of mankind, or just a psychological horror fest that really messes with your mind, sometimes horror can be great. But then you get the horror movies which are just jump scare after jump scare after jump scare, with no real plot holding the whole thing together. And I gotta say, this is definitely the case for The Grudge. Now, I never saw the original Grudge, though I did hear that it was a really good horror movie. So, in my naivete, I thought maybe this American remake might actually be quite good. Sadly though, that was just not the case. Honestly, right now, I'm struggling to even remember the plot of this movie. Because to be honest, I don't really feel there was much of a plot to even remember. It's all just a random series of events which seem to have no connection, all held together by jump scare after jump scare after jump scare. Now, I'm not saying that jump scares are inherently the death of a horror movie, but when it's your only thing that you do, it starts to wear thin very quickly. If it was a case that the movie had maybe 5 jump scares throughout the whole thing, that would have been fine. Just space them out, make them a bit unexpected, then that could work. But basically, when the formula of your movie is just person walking slowly through a room, they go to look at something, there's no jump scare. The audience is like, oh, I guess there's no jump scare. And then all of a sudden, blah, gets you. That becomes very old very fast. Which is definitely the case for The Grudge. Number 3. Rose Byrne and Tiffany Haddish. They are very funny women. And I've seen them both give really funny performances in other movies. So naturally, you'd think, put the two of them together and you would have a really funny movie. But instead, you get Like a Boss. I gotta be honest, I knew this movie was going to be bad going into it. I just took one look at the poster and thought, oh yeah, I know exactly where this is going. But I had no idea how unfunny this movie would be. Now, normally when I find comedies that I don't laugh once, it is disappointing, but at the same time, it's not excruciating. However, this movie manages to be both completely unfunny and just cringy as well. There are just so many times where they're trying to set up something being really funny, and you can tell that most of the time it's like the big joke of the movie, like the one that the movie's been building to, or at least one that they would kind of play in the trailer to show how funny this movie is. But I would say that a lot of comedy comes from subverting of your expectations. Because if you think something's going one way and then somehow it turns out to be something completely different, that's funny. But in this one, you know exactly where every single joke is going, so it just becomes completely unfunny. Like, I think there was a scene in this movie where characters eat some chilies. Oh, I wonder what's gonna happen in this scene. Their mouths start to get hotter and hotter as they become more and more uncomfortable to the point where they can't bear it anymore. And as well, a lot of their character decisions were basically made only for following the plot's formula. Because you know exactly how these movies are gonna go. You got two friends who are really friendly with one another. They're presented with a new opportunity. They say, we're not gonna fight, we're gonna stay together. And then all of a sudden they start falling out with one another. They have a big, massive blowout. They go their own separate ways, and then they come back together, and they're stronger for it. It's been done a million times before, and even in lesser movies has been more compelling than these two. And you can tell most of the time they're only falling out because the plot needs them to. Not from any logical character decisions, but basically because the movie said so. And that, for me, spells a movie that's really unenjoyable. Number 2. There was a time when Adam Sandler was one of the kings of comedy, an unstoppable force. Everyone loved him. He released hit after hit. And for people who didn't like him, they could still acknowledge that his movies had something to them. They had passion behind them. But I would say in the last 10, maybe even 15 years, that has not been the case for Adam Sandler. He's just released cash grab after cash grab. Just movies where his mates go on holiday. Botched concepts which could have been great in better hands, just completely destroyed. And so for the longest time, I've just been uninterested to watch any Adam Sandler movie. But then one of my friends said that his new movie, Hubie Halloween, was, you know, alright. He said that it was pretty funny. There was a bit of a unexpected twist in it, and, you know, overall just a funny movie. And I do value this friend's opinion, so I thought, maybe this might be the one that actually changes my opinion of Adam Sandler finally. But then it became very apparent very early on that this was just going to be another Adam Sandler movie. The guy's just got it down to a formula now of how to make a bad comedy. Have a guy who's got an Adam Sandler background with an Adam Sandler problem, and, you know, just throw a funny voice in there just to make the character a little bit more interesting. Though I will say he didn't have the usual Adam Sandler problems, which I did feel was a little bit refreshing, but he had pretty much everything else that makes a typical Adam Sandler character. And going on to the voice is usually one of the worst things about Adam Sandler characters because he tries and finds the most irritating voice that he can possibly do for a character. So when your lead character basically is just like, hello, my name is Hubie Halloween. This is how I'm going to speak for the whole movie. Are you annoyed by this? Because I'm always annoyed by this. So yeah, when you have to listen to that for a whole movie for no other reason than him trying to do a funny voice, it becomes very irritating very early on. Realistically, I shouldn't have expected anything less from Adam Sandler, but To be honest, I know in my heart that if Adam Sandler, honest to God, tried to make a good comedy, I feel like he could do it. If he put his heart and soul into a project, I feel that this guy could make a really damn good comedy. But instead, he does the easy thing, he does the quick thing, he tries to get the quick laugh, he makes a cheap movie which he know will make its money back purely because it was made for nothing, and the first couple of people who are either just too into Adam Sandler to know not to watch his movies, or the people who basically get tricked into watching them, he knows he'll make his money off them. And if that keeps happening, Adam Sandler's going to keep making these movies. And because of that, we'll keep getting movies like Hubie Halloween. So guys, normally for my top 10s, I do try and have an honourable, or for the worst list case, a dishonourable mention section. But for this list, I am going to forego it because the other movies that I would have added to the dishonourable mentions, I feel like I would only just add them because they were towards the bottom of the list. Not necessarily because they were bad, but just because they weren't as good as other movies that were higher on the list. So for this year, I'm going to forego doing the dishonourable mentions and go straight on to number 1. So guys, here it is. The worst movie of 2020. Realistically, going into all of these movies, I didn't really have high hopes for them, or at the very least, I didn't think they were going to be anything above average. But for my number 1 choice for worst movie of the year, I honestly thought that it was going to make my top 10 list. At a stretch, I almost thought that this movie was going to be my favourite movie of the year, because the genre in which this movie belongs to is one of my favourite genres of movies just entirely. But once I finished watching this movie, it didn't crack my top 10. It wasn't really even in my top 15. It was about in the middle of my list. But then, once I stopped and thought about this movie, it went further and further down my list, to the point where it was just inching out of the top 10. But then, I thought about it some more. I thought about all the disappointing things that happened in this one, all the build-up that it had, and that ultimately it just went nowhere. Till eventually, it made the bottom list. But then, I thought about it again. Just the inconsistent character choices, the lame action choreography, and how ultimately this movie just doesn't even matter, to the point where it has become my worst movie of 2020. That movie is Wonder Woman 1984. Honest to God, I never thought that I would put a movie like this at the bottom of my list of movies in a year. I saw 49 movies this year, which is definitely less than I normally do. But somehow, out of all of those near 50 movies, this one was the worst one for me. And I would say a lot of the reason is because of the same criteria as to why I had Hellboy on the bottom of my list last year. It's because I really, really wanted it to be good. I expected so much from this movie, and it just did not deliver. One of the real only saving graces of this movie was Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. I still feel that she is very passionate about this character and wasn't phoning it in for this movie. And if she does feature in another DCEU movie or have her own DCEU movie, then I would still really look forward to it. But I would always remember that Wonder Woman 1984 exists. I would say that maybe in the next couple of months, I might think better of this movie. Or on the complete opposite end, I might have been thinking worse of this film. But as it stands right now, this movie was just horribly disappointing, to the point where I've made it my worst movie of 2020. Okay guys, that's my list of the top 10 worst movies of 2020. Let me know if you agree or disagree on my list. I'd love to hear what your least favourite movies of the year were. Just, I would say, remember that all of this is my opinion. You guys have your opinions as well as what you thought that was the worst movie, and this was my opinion for the top 10 worst movies of the year. So stick around for my next video because it's the big one. It's my top 10 best movies of 2020, and I gotta say that there are some really good movies in this list. So in summary, as long as there's bad movies to review, you can be sure that some of them will make a bottom 10 list. So until next time guys, I've been Michael. See ya!